As the city continues a desperate evacuation, Gordon receives a call from Batman, who emerges from a pile of bones, buried there by the Riddler and Dr. Death's trap. Batman directs the police lieutenant to Wayne Tower, where Riddler is planning to seize control over all the city's computer systems once the police turn the power back on. As for Batman, the city watches as a giant blimp appears in the stormy skies, a prototype of the ones used in Gotham developed by Wayne Tech. On board this bat blimp, Bruce contacts Alfred and explains that Nigma and Halpern worked together to create a weather balloon that would serve as a remote hacking hub in order to take over the city. It's also one nearly impossible to access in this storm. Meanwhile, Gordon contacts his old partner Dan Corrigan, who happens to be in charge of restoring Gotham's power. Because of the dark history between these two men, Corrigan is unwilling to hear of any warnings from Gordon regarding the Riddler. In the skies above, the storm breaks down the blimp, and Batman is forced to leap nearly 20 feet into the air so he can reach the weather balloon. And amidst all the lightning and torrential rain, the Dark Knight manages to get his grappling hook on top of the aircraft. There, he finds Dr. Death waiting for him, just as Gordon confronts the Riddler. Nigma springs a trap on Jim, nearly crushing the man to death with a massive boulder, while Dr. Death attacks Batman on the weather balloon. In the struggle, the Dark Knight drops the jammer he had prepared against the Riddler, and it flies off the balloon into the city below. The Dark Knight quickly beats Halpern down, who starts to rant about how his son was killed in an operation, on orders from Philip to seek out his long-lost nephew, Bruce Wayne. Though this shocks Batman, he manages to detonate an explosive on the weather balloon's console in an attempt to destroy it. Halpern is injured by this, and willingly dies rather than attempt to heal from his wounds, telling Batman to remember his story, while commenting that Bruce Wayne had the right idea of just giving up on this wretched city. Just then, the police restore power, while the Riddler quietly leaves Wayne Tower, prepared for his next plan. With the balloon still intact, Nigma seizes control of the city and destroys every retaining wall in an instant. Gotham is flooded with water, while the weather balloon and Gotham City's blimps are sent hurtling into the ground. Nearly a month later, Bruce wakes up, recovering in the home of a family known as the Thomases. One of the sons in the family, a young man named Duke, greets Bruce Wayne and welcomes him to a new year, the 0 year, as the Riddler has called it. Batman manages to contact Alfred, even though the Riddler is preventing most communications within the city, and he learns what has happened since he fell unconscious. With a special formula developed by a scientist named Dr. Pamela Isley, Edward Nigma has allowed the city center to become overgrown with wildlife. Meanwhile, about 10% of the city's protective barriers from flooding are completely gone. Tunnels in and around the city are flooded, bridges are rigged to explode, and if anyone comes in contact from the outside, Nigma will release balloons filled with toxic gas on those who do so. Under these circumstances, the city has fallen under Riddler's absolute authority. At the center of the city, anyone can engage in the disturbed villain by challenging him with a riddle, but so far Nigma has time and time again solved everyone's riddle, and upon doing so, he feeds the challenger to a pack of jackals from Gotham Zoo. Meanwhile, Gordon awaits the secret arrival of a small tactical troop. He is surprised to see only 5 men, commenting he expected and asked for far more, when suddenly they are accosted by a number of drones controlled by the Riddler. The soldiers reveal that the government is actually willing to go so far as to admit defeat, and they offer the villain a cash payout. Nigma responds by unleashing a chain reaction of buildings collapsing upon one another, nearly killing all the men save for the timely intervention of the Dark Knight, returned to action. Amidst the wreckage, James Gordon introduces the dismayed soldiers to Batman. On a rooftop, Lucius Fox thinks of his son, and he looks on, prepared to confront the Riddler on his own, when a figure appears before him, and the scientist immediately reconsiders his plans. Fox joins with Batman and Gordon, informing them that to maintain control of the city, the Riddler must be hiding somewhere within Gotham. And though the Riddler is being quite careful in hiding his tracks, Lucius is confident he could find the villain if they hook a device directly onto the tower being controlled by the Riddler in the center of the city. So Batman devises a plan where he will challenge the Riddler himself and keep Nigma busy while they set up the device. The Dark Knight goes to prepare, while the others stay in hiding. Later, the Riddler appears on the tower screens, awaiting a challenger, but none speak up, until they hear the sound of an engine roaring to life. Batman appears in broad daylight, in front of an astonished city, and accepts Nigma's challenge. Meanwhile, Lucius prepares the trace remotely while Gordon infiltrates the tower and attaches their device that will allow them to do so. Once he finishes, Fox realizes and informs Batman through a secure radio channel that Edward will need to stay talking for nearly 20 minutes for the trace to complete. So Batman begins to tell his riddle, though Edward is smug and mocking, and repeatedly interrupts the Dark Knight. Still, Batman eventually begins his riddle with the story of a boy so smart not even his parents realized it. He would hack into corporate accounts or government firewalls just to prove he could, yet his genius went unnoticed. Then he went to work for one of the most powerful people in the world, but nobody can notice his intelligence still. It's because the boy only cares about himself, and never uses his intelligence to help people meaningfully change the world. Knowing he is speaking of Nigma himself, the Riddler tries to turn this on Batman, saying under that cowl there must be some sort of disgruntled veteran, trying to suss out the identity of Bruce. When Batman says Nigma is wrong about him, Edward simply opens a trapdoor, and in response, Gordon jumps off the tower all the way down into Gotham's flooded subway systems to save the Dark Knight. As he is dropped into the pit below, the Riddler mentions he has upgraded the Jackals, and Batman is attacked by a pair of lions. The Riddler watches as Batman fights a prolonged battle. Incredibly, Batman is able to defeat the lions, just as the tracking device finally finishes. Enigma drops an entire parking garage worth of cars on the Dark Knight, who is narrowly saved by Gordon. The trace leads them to a tunnel underneath the old tower used for Wayne Enterprises. Gordon, Batman, and the soldiers work together to try and trap the Riddler, approaching the location from different directions. Too late, Batman realizes this is yet another trap, with multiple armed robots waiting for them. In the battle against a drone, the Dark Knight is launched out of Wayne Tower and nearly careens to his death, while Lucius, still working remotely, is ambushed by another. Luckily, Batman is able to regroup with Fox and save the man's life, but they have no idea where the Riddler is really hiding. Bruce and Lucius, however, deduce the Riddler's master plan to destroy Gotham once and for all. By using explosives Nigma has rigged across the city, he plans to trick the government into inadvertently setting off a chain reaction of explosives once he lures them into doing a tactical missile strike. With the government frustrated at the situation and already preparing said strike, the two realize they have just 40 minutes left to save the city. Batman uses a pattern in the signal to correctly deduce the Riddler's true location, at the museum's Egypt exhibit, where the Sphinx replica is held. There, the Riddler applauds Batman, but warns the Dark Knight that the real game has just begun. Lasers surround the hero. Enigma explains that crossing them will trigger explosions across the city. He will, however, deactivate them for each riddle Batman correctly solves, out of a series of 12. Meanwhile, Gordon and Fox work to delay the jets and prevent them from bombing Gotham. With no other choice, Batman begins to correctly solve the riddles, one after the other. However, for the last one, the Dark Knight falters, apparently making an incorrect guess. But Batman reveals it is irrelevant. They have finally managed to block Edward Nigma's signal and control over the city, using Philip Kane's giant penny as a powerful conductor that is sending a jamming sequence across Gotham. No longer able to activate the explosives, Batman grabs Edward, just as Gordon manages to rig a rudimentary version of the bat signal to delay the jets. The Riddler reveals his final play though, that he's rigged control over the city to be turned directly to his own heartbeat. Once that connection is severed, the city's power and systems will go dead, and stay that way, having to be restored from scratch, until another person uses the electrode and reboots it with a massive electrical shock to their own body. Enigma mocks Batman, saying that he has at least a 1 in 1,000 chance of surviving it. Wordlessly, Batman grabs the electrode, knocks Enigma out, and shocks himself with 10,000 volts. The Dark Knight wakes up, revived by Alfred, and the city's power is finally restored. The military backs off, while the people of Gotham celebrate their city as it comes back to life. Bruce is shocked Alfred was able to find him in time, but the butler reveals he had been operating in the city during the entire 0 year, ready to intervene and help Batman if needed. The two enjoy a quiet moment together, as finally, at least for the moment, the city has some peace. After another month, Bruce Wayne is publicly leading a charge to rebuild the city, better than ever, with Lucius Fox at his side. The newly appointed police commissioner James Gordon warmly greets Wayne, who has found a new level of respect for Jim given everything that has happened. Enigma was deemed too risky to hold in Blackgate Prison, so he's being held in Arkham Asylum while the authorities figure out what to do with him. Gordon notices that someone appears to have quietly given him a new coat, asking if Batman said anything about it to Bruce Wayne, but the billionaire simply suggests it might be time for a new one, implying it is time to move on from Gotham's old days of corruption. Alfred informs Bruce that a woman has arrived, Julie Madison. When Wayne refuses to see her and Alfred presses the matter, Bruce quietly confesses to once, long ago, nearly seeking electroshock therapy to escape the memory of his parents' death. Since then, he has really struggled to find happiness and meaning, but now Batman gives him both of those things. Alfred says Bruce simply hasn't experienced true joy and love in his life, but Wayne retorts that will never be him. The butler begs Bruce to have just one drink with Julie, but he refuses. Looking over at the woman, Alfred sees Bruce sitting down with her and striking up a conversation, ostensibly just to be polite and let her go. But one thing leads to another, and pretty soon they're dating, eventually even starting a family of their own. Years later, a much older Wayne thanks Alfred for all of this, but the butler thinks nothing of it, having always been there for the man who became his son. In the real world, as his daydream ends, Alfred stands over the young woman and regretfully informs her that Bruce Wayne is spoken for.